thought of my only child having brain cancer. It was just the horror of it.
My dad, because I was young, he hid a lot of stuff from me because he didn't want to scare me.
The prognosis was bleak.
This is a very dangerous cancer that does spread to other parts of the body, is an aggressive tumor, is life-threatening if not treated.
Durable.
I was very, because I was trying so hard, and it was just like everything was against you.
But, you know, you do what you have to do.
Cancer patients have to be treated uniquely. You don't treat cancer, you treat the person who has the cancer.
The Masons' battle with cancer nearly 10 years earlier had been excruciating and devastated them financially. So when Valerie began to experience physically debilitating symptoms, her parents were terrified that their worst nightmare may soon be starting over.
With his persistence, I should add, I decided to see them. It was late in the evening. She walked in just terrible pain. It was written all over her face.
It didn't take him long at all, you know, he just had me on the massage, table that they have there, and he, massaged my legs and everything, feeling that it was really tight on my left side, and, he asked where it hurt, which was right in my lower left side, above my hip, kind of by my spine.
As soon as he put his hands on the small of her back, he jumped back and he said, he pointed at her, he says, "There's something very, very wrong right here."
I sensed immediately that in the area that she was so sore, it was an extreme heat, which is uncommon to the body.
He could say it's a hot spot there, which means that the body is obviously fighting an infection, and he wouldn't want to do anything until we found out what it was. And he said that I should go get an MRI scheduled right away.
Frankly, I had not ever seen anybody on my table that had that acute heat and that type of prominence associated together.
He said, he's looking at it, he says, "I can't help her. This is beyond me. You need to get her to an MRI right away."
We had to go back to our family physician because he had to schedule my MRI. And that was the first and only time he looked at me. He's like, "All right, so put on a gown," and he does, and he looks at my back. And by this time, you could actually see that there was a bit of a lump there. And he's looking at it, he's like, "Oh my God, look at that." And he's like, "Oh, we're scheduling this right away." I'm like, "You couldn't have done that a year and a half ago when I wasn't in pain?"
We were in this big room. She's off there getting her MRI. And I can see the technician at the other end of this big room, and we're sitting in these chairs. And I'm looking at the screen, and normally I wouldn't know what I was looking at, but I'm looking at the screen from like 50 feet away. It doesn't look right.
The doctors at Children's Medical City, Dallas Children's Hospital here, came in, sat down, and wanted to explain in his professional manner that it was Ewing sarcoma cancer. And it's quite extensive. And then they had a surgeon they brought in that told us that because of the size, the mass, that he couldn't even do surgery.
Valerie was suffering from a vicious cancer called a Ewing sarcoma. It's a rare type of sarcoma that usually begins in the bones, but rapidly spreads to lungs especially, but can go to brain and liver and just about anywhere else it can manage to go to. And oftentimes the metastases are random.
It's kind of like that book Gilda Radner wrote. It said, "It's always something." And that's what was running through my mind. It's like, it's always something. What's next? It's kind of like, what's next?
We were sitting with Valerie in her room, and he came in again, and they had taken more tests. I remember it wasn't the next day. It could have been 2 days. They took some tests, and the test came back. And he says, "I have some more bad news for you." And he didn't give you time to stop him. He just blurted out that her cancer has metastasized to both her lungs and it's a lot more serious than we originally thought.
I just totally flipped out. I started crying, and I was very angry. And my mom was like holding me, and she's like, "It's gonna be okay." And I was just like, I was like, why? Why? It's just my whole question was why? How could this happen? It just didn't make any sense. And what angered me is their negligence. Hello, they could have prevented this a long way behind, back before it got this far gone.
For a year, nobody bothered to just simply take a picture. What would it have took? An x-ray, some exam, a picture of that area.
It had been going on for so long. It eaten into her pelvic bone quite a bit. Swiss cheese.
In Ewing sarcoma, the protocol is a very lengthy protocol. It often involves intensive chemotherapy for as much as a year or more. And by this I mean treatments weekly to every 3 weeks, getting IVs during this time, being constantly at risk and with infection and bleeding, hair loss, nausea and vomiting.
Her first round of chemo left her so depleted. She needed a transfusion, high fever, really looked bad.
Valeri, this cute girl, all bubbly, healthy, running around in trips, and suddenly a couple weeks later you see her without hair, weak, in bed, very sick with the chemotherapy. She lost a lot of weight, and it's very hard for the teenagers. It really hit a lot of the kids in the community. A lot of kids were very touched. They started going to the hospital, some started praying.
I was sad and I was worried for her, and I was angry because I just felt like it wasn't fair for someone who has so much time left to live to have something like this happen.
It makes it a lot harder to concentrate on your life when you're worried about somebody that you really care about and you really love.
She would look fine in the morning, and then in the afternoon we get home, she'd be like pale and she wouldn't feel good.
After my first round of traditional treatment, which was 5 days of intense chemotherapy, I actually went home and I had a fever of 102 degrees.
I brought her home, and I heard this noise, some thump from upstairs.
I passed out upstairs on the floor. I couldn't walk. My dad heard me collapse, and he freaked out, and he ran up there and rushed me to the hospital.
Valerie's chemotherapy had destroyed so many white blood cells that she needed a blood transfusion immediately. Her struggle with cancer had reached a new low.
She's white as a ghost. She was crying, and she said, she was begging me to not do this anymore, to stop them, to not allow them to do this anymore. And I looked at her, and I said, I promise you, no one will hurt you like this again.
Watched in horror as chemotherapy ravaged Valerie's body. They weren't sure how to save their daughter's life, but they had decided that her doctors were missing the mark.
And they said, well, get 14 more of these treatments to go. And we said, there's no way.
She needed 2 units of blood after one treatment. This is one treatment. You want to do 14 of these. Explain to me, what can happen here?
She would have heart damage, liver damage, and kidney damage. Not possible, would. They could get it, that it would get into remission, and then it would come back, and then there'd be nothing they could do. And we're like, oh, I'm sorry, that's not what we wanted to hear.
They never thought of anything better. That, we're gonna make you really sick, and then somehow you're gonna be okay. That's what really upset me.
We started back with the supplements that we originally used to do, change the diet again.
My dad was up endless nights on the computer, just searching, alternative medicine and, Ewing sarcoma.
And then I clicked on something. I don't even know how I got to this webpage, and Burton Goldberg's website popped up.
I'm a journalist, and I've been studying integrative and alternative medicine for 30 years. After working with the masters of the world, physicians from Europe to the United States to Israel to Russia, I put a book together doing all the therapies on over 208 health conditions and how using the therapies for these health conditions can reverse even end-stage cancer.
I didn't know what time it was. I realized it was about 4:30 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. I get on my phone, I called the number, it was on the screen, and I realized what time it was. I said, oh, geez, I hope this guy doesn't get mad at me because I'm calling in the middle of the night. But I got his answering machine, and he called me back the next morning, and I explained to him the situation.
As I heard Don, the prognosis was bleak, and he was beside himself. And he says, I have a daughter who can't move, she's in pain, she can't do chemotherapy, what should I do? And so I told him what I thought she could do.
He says, you run. You don't walk, you run to Dr. Forsyth in Reno, Nevada.
Dr. Forsyth practiced integrative medicine, using the best of both worlds. And I said, this is the man for you.
My protocol was to use complementary therapy to a lower dose of chemotherapy. The chemo that she was given back in Texas was very harsh. It was heavy-duty chemo. It was like using a sledgehammer rather than a feather duster. So it was not user-friendly chemo by any means. She had significant hair loss, nausea, vomiting, and what we call cytopenias, which means all of her blood counts were down. Her red count, her white count, her platelet counts were all diminished. And this can be life-threatening because if you get low white counts, you can get overwhelming infections. If you get low platelet counts, you can bleed to death very easily.
Dr. Forsyth normally didn't take patients under 18, but because Burton Goldberg knew him and explained her story, it was really incredible that he said, all right, I'll take her.
Dr. Forsyth, he's an oncologist, board-certified oncologist. He's a doctor. He takes insurance, but he says it's going to be expensive for the alternative.
And Don is one tenacious daddy. he had a mission.
So the only thing I could think of, I went to my synagogue and I told my rabbi and I said, gentlemen, we need to raise some money.
I decided, me and Rabbi Rosenblatt, my co-worker, that we were going to find the money, or as much money as we could, to take care of Valerie. Even though we didn't agree with the alternative medicine, we didn't agree with this, we thought that she should really go to the normal doctors, she should get chemotherapy.
You know, a lot of people thought we were kind of crazy, you know, taking such a risk. But when they don't give you much prognosis anyway, are you really taking that big of a risk?
Fortunately, a family friend referred the Masons to Rick Shalvoy and Row for a Cure, a charitable foundation which raises funds for cancer research through boating events.
I honestly thought that between you and me, I really honestly thought that in my mind, I'm going to lose another student, I'm going to lose another child. And in my mind, I was preparing myself for the funeral.
The treatment was killing Valerie, and something in Don Mason's gut told him there must be another way. Some place that could provide a true healing solution. Dr. James Forsyth ran such a place in Reno, Nevada.
I was kind of hoping for a bigger building. I know that sounds a little silly maybe, but I'm thinking I just built this guy up to all my people I know, and all I see is, you know, it's a nice clinic. Pretty, you know, it looks nice, everything looks good, you know, beautiful area, mountains in the background, you know. I would kind of like to see like maybe a hospital or something like that.
I was the only 17-year-old in there. Everyone else was, you know, most of them were older ladies that had, you know, breast cancer. A lot of them had been sent there because they were end-stage cancer, and the hospital in the area said, well, you know, we can't do anything else with you.
My protocol was to use conventional therapy with complementary therapy. That would be adding some form of alternative therapy to the mix to build their immune system and to assist and aid and be an adjuvant therapy to chemotherapy.
Dr. Forsyth actually took the original chemotherapy protocol I was taking for Ewing sarcoma. He was using the same one, but he shrunk it immensely, where bags were like yay big, they turned to like this big. And I only got chemotherapy maybe 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
The therapies that we used in the complementary arena were supplements so designated by the FDA. One was called poly-MVA.
The poly-MVA is made out of palladium, lipoic acid, minerals, and vitamins.
Now, as far as mechanism of action, the poly-MVA goes into the cancer cell and creates hyper energy. It super energizes the cancer cell. The cancer cell itself tends to be a very low energy system. The poly-MVA super energizes the cancer cell and in layman's term, more or less fries the cancer cell or electrocutes it because it can't tolerate this excess energy.
Dr. Forsyth also put Valerie on his proprietary formula, the Forsyth Immune Booster. Administered with an IV, it fortified Valerie's immune system by adding vitamins, minerals, and a homeopathic mineral called salicinium.
Salicinium goes after the fermenting properties of the cancer cell. Cancer cells do not use oxygen in their metabolism. They're anaerobic cells. They have what's called anaerobic glycolysis, which means they metabolize the sugar molecule without the oxygen molecule. They use it anaerobically.
Dr. Forsyth used a 1-2 punch when fighting cancer. First, his protocol supercharged the cancer cells to such a degree that they would short circuit. Second, it interrupted the way the cancer metabolized food.
When I instituted this protocol, right away I noticed results. She was leaving the clinic in a spirited mood. She was not sick. She was not having this overwhelming nausea, vomiting, fatigue, malaise. She had a positive outlook, and her parents also noticed right away that she was a different person than she had been under the conventional therapy she was receiving in Texas.
In a relatively short time, in just a few days, Valerie looked better, she was talking better, she was happier.
And after actually 1 week of being there, the cancer in my lungs was gone.
We noticed that her chest X-ray tumor nodules were shrinking in size, and the diameter was going down, the number and size were improving, and in her pelvic area, the large erosive lytic lesion in her pelvis, which was actually eating a large hole in her left pelvis, was reducing in size and starting to fill in with normal bone tissue.
Valerie, in 3 weeks, was practically okay. That doesn't happen in standard medicine at all.
And after a total of 4 weeks, my cancer was completely dead. It calcified. And that was about 8 months ago, so I've been in remission going about 9 months now.
How could one girl be stricken with cancer twice before her 18th birthday? The initial treatment Valerie received when she was 7 may have been to blame.
The fact that she did have an earlier cancer, which was infected the brain and spinal column, and we do feel that perhaps the earlier heavy chemo and radiation she received probably was, in fact, partially responsible, at least. One can never prove this, of course, but for causing the second cancer, namely the Yואינג sarcoma.
Doctors, even my oncologist here, said they do studies over everything they do, like every 10 years, and 80% of children who get preventive radiation and chemo as 7 or 8 year olds, really young children, produce a sarcoma like the type I had later in life. But it usually comes back right away, like maybe between 3 or 4 years.
I think when we have successes in treatment with our combined protocol, more and more doctors outside of the area of homeopathic oncology, which I consider myself to be in this area, are incorporating my protocols in what they do on a day-to-day basis simply because it works.
So the dilemma I have now is my daughter's feeling great. The recovery is like better than I ever dreamed it could be. But we have to go home. I mean, I haven't worked for 2 months. My business is like devastated. And my wife, they gave her leave, but she doesn't get back soon, we're going to lose benefits, and we can't do that.
Unfortunately, the only treatment that helped Valerie was in Reno, 1,000 miles from home. Their family doctor in Texas was unfamiliar with this new approach.
The next day, we went back, and Dr. Forsyth stopped me. He said, "Oh, by the way," he said, "I talked to Dr. Goldman, and he's agreed to continue the same protocol. I said, oh, thank you, God. Thank you. I don't know what I can ever do to repay that man.
Today I'm very skeptical about it, but you can't deny it. The tumor got smaller. She's back in school. She's back with her friends. She wants to continue her plans. She has many plans, and she knows what she wants from life. And if anyone deserves it, it's Valeri.
I've been in remission going about 9 months now. Stage 4 cancer. And everyone loves hearing that, and I think of it myself, and it's just kind of like, hallelujah. I can hear the bells ringing. It's pretty amazing. It's cool.
Valerie's survival of this cancer, I feel, could be definitely attributed to Dawn's tenaciousness and support of her family members.
So many people would look at it as like, not break down and lose faith and everything, but I'm an Orthodox Jew, and God does not give us tests that we can't pass.
I can't imagine, going through something like a devastating illness, without having the support group of, either family or, your religious community or your people at work.
It shapes your character, and you learn something. You appreciate life more. You learn to smell the flowers, spend more time, talking to your parents. How was their day? What was up with you? You look at life differently, and it teaches you something. That, you look at life as if, what can I take out of every day? What can I cherish? What can I accomplish?
A mother who found answers in the unknown. A father who never stopped pushing for results. And a hopeful young girl whose spirit was never crushed, even in the darkest hours. The Masons, a simple, close-knit family with Midwestern values, would have lost their only daughter if they'd let modern medicine take its course. But they didn't. They pursued every opportunity that could possibly help their daughter overcome cancer. This is a family that truly knows the value of life.